All right, new questions about how marijuana could play into the 2016 presidential race in the bid to win over voters. After potential Republican candidate Jeb Bush admitted to smoking pot in high school, Rand Paul then slammed him as a hypocrite, saying this, quote, he was even opposed to medical marijuana. This is a guy who now admits he smoked marijuana, but he wants to put people in jail who do. I think that's the real hypocrisy, is that people on our side, which include a lot of people who made mistakes growing up, admit their mistakes, but now still want to put people in jail for that. Julie Roginski is a Fox News contributor, previously an advisor to former Democratic Senator Frank Lautenberg, and David Avella is chairman of GOPAC. Good to see you both.
Good to see you.
All right, so David, how much do you think that this is going to play in the GOP primaries? Because there are a lot of candidates, it seems, who say it's a states' rights issue, it's a 10th Amendment thing, leave it to each state to decide. That kind of absolves them of having to say whether they're in or out, although some of them have taken positions.
Well, what we know now is who's going to use sharp elbows in this Republican primary, with Senator Paul coming out. And I would caution that it is a strategy that has its pitfalls, because the majority of Republicans still believe in President Reagan's 11th commandment, which is not to speak ill of a fellow Republican.
It's hard to tell during the primary.
Sometimes it can be. But let me say this. If Julie were running for president, whether she smoked pot or not wouldn't influence my decision on whether to vote for her. The position she takes every week on this panel would impact my decision, and that is how voters will look at where our candidates stand on issues. Where they stand on issues, not whether they smoke pot or not.
Well, Julie, let me ask you, because a lot of times we frame this in the context of talking about younger voters, but is that sort of insulting to them? I mean, they care about finding jobs and getting an education and moving up in life. I mean, we can't assume that, you know, people who want to sit around and smoke pot all day are energized voters who can't wait to get to the polls. I mean, that seems a little counterintuitive.
Pot and energized don't seem very a little congruous to me. You'll be happy to know I don't smoke pot, so you could vote for me or not vote for me.
I wouldn't vote for you.
Well, I appreciate that, but just to be clear, Mom and Dad, I do not smoke pot. I do want to say this. You're absolutely right. I mean, young voters care about jobs. They care about being able to afford a college education. They care about much more than smoking pot or not smoking pot. I think that's a really condescending point. Look, I'm actually going to compliment Senator Paul on this, which is a rare thing for me to do. He and Senator Booker from New Jersey are sponsoring great legislation to reform and decriminalize a lot of this, because you have a lot of especially younger minority voters who are in prison for low-level drug offenses. And I think what he's saying is that you're criminalizing something that people like Jeb Bush and frankly a lot of affluent voters, affluent people have done and never got penalized for, and yet there's a whole segment of our society that's sitting in prison that is penalized for it because of where they come from and what the color of their skin is.
And Rand Paul's people will say he's not saying he's for legalizing marijuana. He's just saying that the penalties may be too harsh. And that's what he's fighting against. I want to talk about Colorado, where this is now legal. The Democratic governor out there, John Hickenlooper, had something to say about this, because he's talking about the fact that he kind of wishes they didn't rush into this, and that he doesn't think that it's a great idea. Other states should think twice about it. There was a lot of talk about the instant windfall that would come from the tax money from this. He said, if I could have waved a wand after the election, I would have reversed the election and said this was a bad idea. You don't want to be the first person to do something like this. He continued on, there's a whole regulatory environment that really regulates alcohol. We're starting from scratch, and we don't have a federal partner because marijuana is still illegal federally, although a number of these GOP critics, Ted Cruz, potential senator, has also said the feds haven't done a good job at enforcing this at the federal level.
Not surprising, Governor Hickenlooper's comments. He was opposed from the very beginning on the legalization. That said, President Obama actually has made a comment that is far more impactful to this whole debate, which is that now states that have approved medical marijuana or approved the legalization of marijuana, we shouldn't use federal resources to enforce it in their states, to enforce federal law. And if that's going to be our new principle, what other federal laws are we now going to implement because a state has decided they're going to pass a law that says, we're not going to do that anymore?
Well, so speaking of states' rights, which I would think you would be for, but it sounds like you might not be in this instance. I think that Colorado absolutely should regulate this. This is like alcohol or anything else. We regulate contents of food and the disclaimers on food. We obviously regulate alcohol. We need to do a better job of regulating marijuana where it's legal and ensure that people know what they're getting. Because right now, you saw from Maureen Dowd's column, she went and ate a pot brownie and apparently spent 24 hours in bed.
Oh, boy.
Because she didn't know what she was getting. I think that's a good idea to have some sort of regulation so that people know what they're ingesting, even if they're ingesting it legally. Because, again, it is a powerful substance.
It is, whether it's legal or not. You're absolutely right. All right, Julie and David, good to see you both.
Thanks.
Always fun to have you together.